Please, yes, do. They're about 12 meters apart. Interesting. They're all the exact same height. Oh my goodness.
Welcome! Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Friends of Trees live at Dorer Unthank Park. We are in Northeast Portland in the Boise neighborhood, and my name is Whitney Dorer. I'm our deputy director. I use she, her pronouns, and I am here today with...
I'm Vivek Shandas. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a professor of urban studies and planning at Portland State University, among a few other hats I wear.
We decided to take a break today from our very busy lives and world to talk about an extremely important topic, heat and trees. And it has definitely been in the news recently, and we are so thrilled that it's getting the attention it needs. And so we're able to come together at this gorgeous park, take a break to talk about heat and trees. And as you can see around us, there's a huge swath of London plane trees in this park, and then this very beautiful opening. And in the distance, there's a row of maples as well. And, you know, to be honest, you couldn't even tell that Portland recently had a heat wave. From this park, looking here, you know, the trees have not been impacted in the same way that they have around other parts of the city. And to be honest, I was actually in Boston visiting family during the heat wave, and Vivek, you were here.
I was here.
So maybe you could explain, like, what happened a few weeks ago, the end of June here in Portland.
Well, we had a meteorological phenomenon called a heat dome, which I actually had heard about in passing, but it really came home to roost that weekend into a weekday, and we had temperatures that were some say 25, some say 35, some say as high as 40 degrees above normal, depending on, I guess, how you're looking at it, but a lot hotter than what we're used to in June. And what we really experienced was something that the meteorologists and the climatologists call a once in a million chance event, which is virtually impossible without the addition of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So it's become very clear from the attribution studies that this was a climate change induced event that we experienced. And the concern that I have is that some people think that this heat wave may actually be an anomaly. You know, the Earth does really unusual things sometimes, or others are saying this might be a threshold that we've reached as a planet that we've crossed over. And so as we wait for this kind of riveting decision of whether it was an anomaly or we're going to see in the future whether this is a threshold we've reached, talking about trees and heat I think is a really timely thing for us to be getting into, because it's a little more complicated than heat, tree, done, right? And so let's get into that a little bit, I hope.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, we're outside of our normal planting season here at Friends of Trees. We finished planting in April, but we'll get back into it in October. And the opportunity to talk to the public about the importance of planting trees often happens at events where we're out in the community gathering interest from people at their house saying, do you want a tree at your property to help cool your space and shade your house and your street, and provide such a great opportunity for that conversation to happen.
Yeah, I'm so glad that it's not just about putting trees into the ground, and there's a conversation that's happening and an engagement that's happening with the community in the process of thinking about trees in spaces.
I'm curious what your thoughts are around a single tree versus many trees. So in this park we have many trees, but there are some challenges within the city of space for trees. And so does a single tree matter and make an impact towards what we're seeing with this urban heat island effect?
Every tree counts. I would love to have that as like the moniker for our conversation. Like, every tree counts. Small, medium, large, old, young. maple, I would even dare say exotic, native, like all those have a ecosystem service they provide. And since we're talking about heat, like the clustering of trees clearly has a kind of multiplicative effect from what we see not only in the climate models and the way we kind of look at spaces, and the individual trees themselves, they cool small spaces and they often have to really struggle. And what we're finding is that trees put in really inhospitable environments where it's really hot and you plant a tree, that tree has, as you probably have seen in your actual real world of planting trees in places, it's hard to keep them alive unless they're given a lot of love and feeding, right? And if we're absent that love and feeding of that individual tree, then it's on its own to just try to like find as much water as it can to survive in those spaces. And that said, ideally what we're trying to do is think about how do we bring an urban forest together? Like how do we make these trees and create a more a system that actually supports all the community members in such a way that these trees are providing that cooling, that natural cooling ability, what some people call nature-based solutions to heat.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it and you go down the sidewalk, and when there is a sidewalk with shade, people are walking in the shade on a hot day.
Right.
And on the sidewalk where there is no shade, no trees, and we can even kind of zoom across the street at this intersection and just look at a property without, without space for trees, and thinking about potentially planting on the private property. So maybe finding space that's on the private property to provide that shade. But I was thinking that just a few weeks ago, 50 degrees is the difference of what it is today to what it was.
Wow.
In the hottest part of Portland.
Right.
And so maybe you can explain also where are those hot spots in the city? Right now we're in Northeast Portland. And again, welcome everybody who's joining. I'm Whitney Dorer, and this is Vivek Shandas with PSU, and we are talking about heat and trees.
Yay, very timely topic.
Yeah.
Coming out of this major heat event that we had just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, and I'd love to keep the conversation going about like the ways in which bigger trees versus smaller trees, as well as like placement of trees, and thinking about that in relation to what's happening just in this little bit of shade that we're in to the sun that we're coming out, and like how those differences play out in what you and I would feel as we're in our homes, walking around, doing our daily errands and things like that. It really matters what's on the landscape, and that's the wonderful thing about talking about trees, is that they occupy a part of the landscape that sometimes is pushed off into a corner and other times really set aside as the perimeter of a park, as we're seeing in this space.
And one complexity to that for size, I would say, is development.
Yeah.
So some of our largest trees are under threat of development across the nation, across the world, really. And how do we protect those spaces, those trees that are providing so much cooling benefit, versus removing that tree for development and then having a situation where the issue is exacerbated, and then we plant a very small tree that maybe doesn't have the time or ability to get to that same level of benefit as the tree that was removed.
That's right, that's right. And development, we've seen, is one of the primary pressures on trees, so we know that really well at this point. So smaller homes that have more of a yard space have more space for private property to get trees in. The other thing we were noticing is I was going down Woodstock Boulevard in Southeast Portland, and like Woodstock and is not a term that comes up a lot with heat, but Woodstock and 93rd, as you get to east parts of Portland, we really start seeing this convergence of the built environment, disinvested areas that have been part of Lentz, and Lentz was more recently annexed into the city than other parts of Portland, and so you see those areas that have been highly disinvested with a lot of asphalt, a lot of concrete, very little like space in the public right-of-way for trees, and so what we're seeing is this heightening of temperatures in those areas of Portland. And it's funny, over the last week I've been looking at when did I first call out this issue for the city, and I found this thing from 2008 that I wrote for Coalition for a Livable Future, which is an organization, an umbrella organization, nonprofit in the region, And I remember a back and forth with the then director Jill Fuglister, who's now with Meyer Memorial Trust, about writing an article about heat and the city. And I wrote this piece, and in that, I remember that and other papers, I remember stating that, parts of East Portland are the perfect storm coming together of a lot of historic disinvestment that's happened, a lot of the built environment that's really created and sealed up a lot of the landscapes where getting trees in is really hard, as you all well know, and a level of social vulnerability based on income, based on historically marginalized populations, based on access to cooling centers and ways to stay cool. And what we saw exactly in this heat wave was that parts of East County and East City, East Multnomah County and east of the city of Portland, were the places where the highest number of deaths occurred as a result of this heat wave. And it was something we predicted like over a decade ago, and this is what we're seeing coming out to play out today. And so part of that has been me thinking about what is it we can do from a shade equity point of view, what is it we can do from a kind of engagement, community engagement point of view, and that's where Friends of Trees, I think, really comes together with not only changing the built environment physically, biophysically, and then also through the engagement process, which you all are deeply committed to as well.
Exactly. You just hit it with that connection and that opportunity to reduce isolation.
Yes.
So for folks who are living alone or don't necessarily know what resources are out there, Friends of Trees has been for years working in East Portland and out towards Gresham, and goes door to door to talk about tree planting opportunities. But it's more than just a tree. It's really an opportunity to connect about the neighborhood and the space where we all live.
That's right.
And how one another can support each other.
That's right.
And at the events that we actually host, there is that really magical moment where people do meet one another and feel more connected, leave feeling like they have a support system that maybe is outside their house.
That's right.
And so maybe we could take a minute to go over to this spot in the parking lot to kind of highlight what you were just talking about with your fun tool.
Yeah, I brought a little toy here. Just a little quick thing. So just before we jump on this, one of the things that's coming up for me is really having to do with how we've got a built landscape that now we have to try to retrofit to try to get more kind of cooling options available for communities, and trees being such an obvious one. And if we can think about development as before the development goes in, if we can think about green spaces and the availability of soil volume for getting green spaces in those individual developments, we won't have to now dig up concrete, spend more money, and retrofit an area post, and we know that climate change is only going to bring hotter summers, longer summers, earlier summers, and more frequent heat waves. And so when we're developing, we have no codes right now that actively direct cooling resources for developers, designers, architects, design review boards, etc. And so what we're stuck with is the same old development we've been doing for almost 50, 60, 70 years that's still going in today. And those have not centered really historically disinvested, marginalized communities or green spaces into those designs. And so that's where I think we have a lot of really good work that we need to be doing to encourage new developments to think about green spaces as options that communities would have.
Something I learned from you that was really fascinating was thinking about airflow as well.
Yes.
And how, in this space, I'm feeling a really nice breeze and it's beautiful, and I would come here to sit in a heat wave in the shade. And how the airflow within areas of high development and high buildings is reduced, so it causes just an even larger issue of that intense heat being held to that one tight space.
Yeah, there's really just three things you can do with this heat. As you can kind of dissipate it or bounce it away, really, or you can move it through. Like dissipating heat, often what you get with trees is they transpire all that water. Like they're sending roots really deep in. They're finding ways to be able to transpire that humidity and absorb that sun's moisture. or sun's moisture, that sun's radiation and creating a little bit more localized moisture. You also have shade coming down from the trees, which are super helpful in terms of this parking lot and in terms of even moving air. And with shade, with this is really interesting. You and I are standing here, we're feeling a breeze right now. And the hot temperature of that parking lot and the cool temperature here actually ends up creating micro differences in pressure. And so the heat, like you would stand on the shorefront, you would feel the breeze coming off of the water onto you. It's very similar convection that happens when you have hot and cold coming together, as we learned in like 5th grade or 6th grade even. And so that's a really big part of trying to think about dissipating heat, bouncing it off with lighter surfaces and the like.
And another spot that my mind went to was schoolyards. So,
yes.
You know, I live in North Portland near Astor Elementary. There was a removal of about 10,000 square feet of asphalt just earlier this year where we planted trees. And that takes so much resource.
So much resource.
So if only there had been that forethought
yes.
When the pavement was, you know, across the entire playground, how we would have today trees that would be providing that shade benefit for youth and
yes.
Especially
better grades, cooler, as we're getting earlier summers, we're going to get kids in hot classrooms, they don't learn as well during that, so I'm so glad to hear that. And part of what you're saying really hit me hard because it's like we're putting a lot of more carbon dioxide into the air by having to tear up a lot of that concrete, and it's hard to make a justification for trees going in when we're doing that. At the same time, we're also reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the future by offering that shading, offering all the cooling services that trees provide. And I'm trying to get my system to work here. Technology's always funny that way. I'm like, it's charged, it's ready to go, but why is it not?
So something else that I've been thinking about, and we all have been discussing as an organization at Friends of Trees, is just really thinking creatively around finding those spaces for trees within neighborhoods of low canopy, low income, high communities of color, and also connected to that is areas where there are multifamily houses and apartment buildings.
Yes.
So in particular where the highest temperatures were in East Portland, how can we go to some of those nearby buildings and encourage planting at those sites and around those buildings in a way that benefit can come to those living in places where they really don't have the access of the same type of street tree right outside their front yard, and just a lot more constraints on space.
Yes, yes. We have a 1950s often designed for multifamily apartment where we create this horseshoe design, drop a big asphalt parking lot in the middle, and that just amplifies temperatures. And when we see the kind of the results of a lot of the deaths that occurred from this heat wave, we will see many of them are implicated to multifamily residential. We'll see that they're implicated to trailer home parks, which are often like just tin, metal boxes that are placed on asphalt with very little tree canopy or shade that's nearby. And so these are the kinds of designs that I think we need to be having questions about, and that right now we're not seeing any municipality kind of facing directly and trying to think about what it takes to manage and design a city for the more intense temperatures that we're all going to be enduring.
I think that, Friends of Trees is hoping to really spark curiosity from folks about this, about trees and the importance of trees, especially when it comes to heat and urban heat island effect.
That's right.
And so I think that these conversations are a part of that, sparking curiosity, learning more, thinking about how you as a localized community can come together and think about solutions, because sometimes the solutions lie in your very own backyard, as opposed to going a route that may take many years, like thinking creatively now, and it's going to take creativity of everyone to get there.
For sure. And we just need to pressure I think there's a lot of pressure that we also need to be thinking about, like where are the leverage points in this system to really think about. The children these days are really, I'm noticing, very pissed, and in many cases really upset generally about the way we're still contributing to greenhouse gases, still continuing to develop in the same way we have in a long time. So yeah, we're really thinking about engaging the multi-generational kind of communities in this work.
So does your,
yes,
nice.
So,
all right, so come on over.
Yeah, so let's see. So I'm going to try to do this. I just want to point this out first. We're looking at right now, here's a London plane tree, and the temperature of the London plane tree on its actual trunk is about 72, 73-ish, 71, 72-ish, right there, depending on where on the trunk that I actually point this thing with the crosshairs, Fahrenheit. And I'd come down here, and you can see the asphalt's a bit warmer. It's getting up to about 77. There's a spot there that's about a little bit more sunshine. That's about 80, 85, 84. It's getting in there. And so I want to come around here, and what are we, about 2:30 in the afternoon or so? And the sun hasn't fully been absorbed here, but we're right here looking at this area. We're looking at about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. That's right here in this little asphalt spot right in the middle of the parking lot. And so we're going from what did I see here, about an 80 degree-ish to 140. So that's what, 60 degree difference between the shaded part of a tree canopy shaded part of a parking lot versus a non-shaded part of a parking lot. Now what happens is this is not the temperature. We don't feel 140 degrees, right? We are actually feeling the heat, as you might look in a distance sometimes and you see these kind of thermals coming off of the you can even see them maybe in the distance there as they're coming off of this pavement. That's since this is hotter than the ambient environment, all that heat transfer is occurring from that solid asphalt into the ambient air. And as that ambient air gets hotter, this tree canopy right here is mixing with that hot air and cooling this down for us. So what you and I are feeling is a combination of what that surface is doing and what this surface is doing. So if I were to have a really sensitive air temperature measurement right here, it would be, between about whatever it is, like 70 in the coolest and then 140 in the highest. And so we're getting about 80, 85 degrees in the air temperature as it mixes, depending on how much of that green space and how much of that asphalt we have here.
Mm-hmm. And I'm looking off in the distance at the building here. We're at Self Enhancement Inc., SEI. And you can see, where the shade is on the building and where shade is not. And I imagine your fun tool, I don't know, I kind of want to get that for myself and be able to go around my neighborhood and also my house and thinking about where those areas of intense heat are. The more data and information people have at their fingertips to be able to kind of understand these really complex
microdynamics, microclimate dynamics, really.
Yeah.
And, I just want to say to that, because I can geek out on this forever, and I don't want to overstep or over-explain, but I do want to just note that for the detail of what you're describing, we are just in this time where we're getting incredible detail, and we're finally, with that detail, able to see the contributions that green spaces are providing us, the contributions that certain designs are amplifying temperatures, and the way in which communities can, in a way, take a lot more kind of refuge in cooler places. And we're starting to get that information, and I think at this point we're getting pretty good at it, and we have a good way of describing it, knowing where the hottest and coolest parts of the region are, and and where we might want to be centering some of this attention.
I feel like just talking to you, I know that Friends of Trees is going to gain a lot from how we can be better prepared moving into the next planting season and thinking about this and really targeting our efforts in those areas along high traffic corridors and areas where there is absolutely no canopy. So how can we, put our efforts where it's needed most?
Yeah, and someday maybe, I'm not presuming, but Friends of Trees could also start thinking about friends of green walls and friends of alleyways that need greening and friends of green, there's a variety of ways in which the green friends that we have all around us can be applied in really even sometimes surgically precise ways to be able to cool environments. There's some really interesting thing I've seen in parts of Europe where they've done demonstration projects of a hot parking lot, and they'll put this green room in that parking lot that's essentially walls that are completely covered with ivy and green spaces, often indigenous ivy, and not like ivy that's invasive and takes over, but they've created these specific little pods, and you can go into that and you can feel viscerally the difference between what's in that parking lot and what you're feeling and what's in that little green room. And it's those kinds of demonstration projects and ways to get green kind of across much more of our landscapes is something I've been really curious to see if you all or some groups could really start to advance in this region.
Awesome. Well, I think we have a lot of things to think about. And I know this topic, we've been talking about heat and trees and the way people interact with that too. There's so much to talk about. So I imagine we may want to continue at another time. And my mind is also thinking about the trees and how they are being impacted by this intense heat and what will survive as tree species and be, for the future, trees that we want to continue planting that will be those trees that help us in the future.
Yeah, could we walk over to that fir over there? I'm seeing, just queuing off of what you just said, is how do we keep our green friends like happy in these inhospitable environments?
Yeah.
And can we find ways to identify those trees that may be struggling to survive as temperatures heat up? And so what I'm seeing here with this fir is I'm already seeing some, I would call that in a sense scorching that's maybe happening on the sides of it. And what we're seeing, like a little bit more stress showing up. And we can actually pick up on some of that just from the needles and the way it's. Do you have anything you want to say about this, Whitney?
Yeah, no, I mean, we've been seeing this around town, and in terms of what species are really struggling, I also have been seeing a lot of western red cedars struggling due to the heat, and so it is something that Friends of Trees has been doing, which is just collecting long-term data also on our trees that we're planting and seeing which ones are surviving and doing better than others, and working with our nursery partners to think about what trees are going to be better for the future to plant together. And it really will take also the community. It's going to take voices from the community to share what they are seeing out in neighborhoods, what's doing well and what's really struggling. So it's definitely, I would say this has been impacted by the heat wave.
Yeah, so I was just checking the difference. Yeah, exactly. I was checking the difference between that London plane and this tree here, and just the surface itself is about 90 degrees is what I'm picking up. And that tree we were coming in about 74-ish. And just being in this little pocket, it's providing, a service with shade and what have you to this particular spot, but it's also going to be 10, 15 degrees warmer consistently than that, and therefore is going to need a lot more water and a lot more kind of support as we think about.
I think about the trees that are around parking lots, and we are here at a parking lot, but also, that have a tiny box of soil for them. And it does, it takes a lot of energy and resource to, remind folks to also water.
Yes.
Something that our team is out doing right now is our volunteers are out reminding folks to water their trees, going door to door and saying, it's important to increase watering, especially now as we're seeing with such droughts. And so we'll have a lot of great data to share in the fall just around how this impacted our most recent trees that we planted this year.
Yeah, and if water is a challenge, as it would maybe be for some folks who want to spending money on water, what are your thoughts about like mulch, like just getting mulch around that base and like the idea of soil moisture? I'm thinking about that a lot these days.
Oh yeah, mulch is so important, and Friends of Trees actually uses a bark chip and plants a nice 3-foot ring around each tree that's planted for both street and private property trees, because that is so important for deterring any weeds and keeping that moisture. So we definitely encourage mulch.
Great.
Great. Yeah, and I guess I would love to just end with like what we started in the beginning around your comment that every tree counts. It's not just about needing large parks like this that are many years old, creating such incredible benefit, but it really does take everybody to participate and to engage and think about how we can plant trees together this next year.
Yes, absolutely, and let's keep thinking about hold a little piece of our heart for each tree that's coming down each year as well, because we are seeing a very large number of trees coming down, and in about 4 months I will have very rich data on the total amount of trees that have come down between 2014 and 2020 in the city of Portland, and we're just poring over those data sets at the individual crown level, as well as at the city block level, as well as the neighborhood and regional level. So that's going to be coming out hopefully, if all things go well, by around October, maybe late September, October this year, where I'm hoping to say, hey, this is what we've done to our tree canopy. Some places where we've seen it really grow, and some places where it's totally collapsed. And so I'm looking forward to sharing that with you, and just what does that mean about what we're doing to our existing tree canopy that's so verdant and refreshing and cooling in the city and the region.
Well, I feel honored to be able to spend some time with you in the middle of the day.
Yes,
before we go back to our computers. Let's hope to take a moment in the shade and some deep breaths. I hope you all with us are as well. And yeah, thanks for joining us today. We are excited for another session at some point in the future. We'll keep you updated.
All right, take care. Thanks for all this great time together.